Sonic Love Lab Rat Chapter 1 Kidnapped. The quiet town of Green Hills had never seen such a spectacle as what was currently going on in town square. Naturally, a crowd was slowly gathering around the strange blue creature, lying unconscious on the ground, the hovering spaceship-looking vehicle. Robotnik's maniacal laughter was the only sound that filled the crowded street. The rest of the people present just looked on in stunned silence as two drones detached from his flying ship and flew over to where Sonic was lying unconscious on the road. They each grabbed one of his wrists with robotic arms and lifted him off the ground. Sonic's limp body dangled between the two drones as they brought him back to Robotnik.
No, Sonic!
Tom yelled. He and Maddie had just arrived at the scene. He made a move to run to the little alien's aid. Yet, a red laser pointed at his chest and Maddie's desperate grasp in his arms stopped him.
My, what a surprise!
Robotnik said, acting like he hadn't noticed the distraction at all. The drones held up Sonic in front of him.
My drones are detecting a pulse. I guess this little critter is stronger than I gave it credit for.
Tom and Maddie sent each other a desperate look, a mix between relief that Sonic was alive and fear for what would happen now to their space hedgehog.
Good. Live testing will make for some far more interesting results.
His talk evolved into laughter while he commanded the drones to throw Sonic in a small cage that had emerged from the side of the ship. Once Sonic was in, the cage disappeared again and Robotnik flew off into the sky, still laughing. All Tom and Maddie could do was stare at the retreating ship, with despair clear on their faces.
No!
Tom kicked a small piece of debris hard into a nearby wall.
We're too late. Too slow.
Okay.
Wade looked from his upset friend to the crowd staring in curiosity and confusion and apparently decided to show a little tactfulness.
All right, everybody. Nothing to see here. Disperse. Just another ordinary day in Green Hills.
A few annoyed mumbles came from the spectating crowd, but either way, people began leaving, although still throwing curious looks at the Wachowskis. Wade saw to it that everyone left. Then curiosity seemed to get the better of him as well.
Was that an alien or something?
A single warning look from Tom and Wade backed off with his hands up.
Right. Another time.
Now that they were alone, Maddie began pacing back and forth and mumbling underneath her breath.
Oh gosh, Tom. Oh goodness. He took him. He's gone. We lost him.
Maddie.
Tom sighed, trying to find some soothing words to calm her down, but none came to mind.
You heard him. Sonic's alive, and he's captured. We'll never see him again. Why bring a kid into our lives and then stash him away?
Maddie's voice broke and she covered her face with her hands. Tom hurried to her side and embraced her. He'd only been a little surprised when Maddie had taken to Sonic as fast as she has. Much faster than himself, to tell the truth. She'd always had a big heart, and Sonic was just the kind of kid you had to love.
We're going to save him. We have to.
Tom said with as much conviction as he could muster. While holding Maddie close, Tom looked around in the rubble that surrounded them, and his eyes fell on something interesting.
Maddie, look! It's Sonic's rings!
Tom let go of his wife to pick up the small pouch lying forgotten on the pavement.
Aren't those?
Maddie stared at the golden ring that Tom had just pulled from the pouch.
Yes, his magic rings. We can use those to transport to him. What are we waiting for?
Maddie, honey, we need to be smart about this. We'll only get one chance. Robotnik must not know about these rings' power. Otherwise, he would never leave them behind with us.
Tom reached out and embraced his wife again, and she let him.
We have to come up with a plan.
Yeah, you're right.
Maddie dried her eyes.
We'll save him.
Tom and Maddie worked tirelessly to come up with some kind of plan. Neither of them could sleep much, as long as Sonic remained in Robotnik's hold. The trouble was that the rings only work if the user can picture the place they want to go. Since they didn't know where Sonic was being held, they couldn't just portal their way in and save him. The solution suddenly presented itself to them in the form of an unsettling clue. One morning, almost 2 weeks after Sonic's kidnapping, Crazy Carl showed up at the Wachowski's door. Carl was fiddling with the phone in his hands, looking very uncomfortable.
I'm mighty sorry to be the bringer of this sort of thing, but, well, I thought you two had to know. You see,
He turned on his phone.
I stumbled across some very interesting footage on this website, realaliens.com. Perhaps you two know it? It's a very famous site with leaked videos of aliens.
Look, Carl.
Tom sighed, the exasperation plain on his face. He was not in the mood for listening to the latest conspiracy theory that the man had made up.
No, wait, I've really found something. It's the Blue Devil, I'm sure of it.
Both Maddie and Tom perked up in curiosity, and maybe just a sliver of hope. The man found the video on his phone and handed it to the anxious couple. As soon as they clicked play, the heart-wrenching sound of Sonic's screams flowed from the speaker. The video showed a lab with instruments, buttons, and screens covering the walls. In the middle stood an operation table, and on top of the table was none other than Sonic. His hands and feet were bound to each corner of the operating table, and around his neck was a thick black collar that seemed to be giving him electric shocks, hence the screaming. His little body was enveloped in blue flickers of electricity, casting a blue light onto the rest of the room. Maddie let out a little scream of her own as she took it all in. Tom just stared at the scene in disbelief. Carl shifted awkwardly before mumbling.
It probably won't help, but
Thank you, Carl.
Tom managed to croak out through the lump in his throat as he closed the door in Carl's face, cutting him off. Carl apparently got the clue that he should leave. At least he didn't open the door to ask for his phone back. Maddie heard a sniffling and saw a few tears escape Tom's eyes, which had not left the screen. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen him cry.
Oh, Tom.
She whispered, turning to her husband and stroking his cheek. She took the phone from him and clicked pause, holding it like one would a venomous snake. While desperately racking her brain to come up with some comforting words, a thought struck her.
Tom, you know what this means?
When he didn't answer immediately, she continued with growing excitement.
We now know what the room looks like. We know where he is.
She saw the moment his eyes lit up when the realization dawned on him too.
The rings.
This meant that they should be able to use a ring to find him now. Tom reached to the living room, where they kept the bag of magical rings.
Hold on, Tom.
Maddie hurriedly followed her husband.
What?
We can't just go rushing in. We need some kind of plan. I seem to remember those being your own words.
You saw the video. He's being tortured.
Tom protested while pointing to the phone in her hand.
I know, but we have to be prepared. We'll only get one shot.
Right. We can only guess that it's somewhere in the US. Hopefully in the same time zone. We should do it at nighttime. Hopefully he's alone in the room at night.
Maddie nodded.
Yes, and we'll need some tools and weapons.
We can't take him back here. This will be the first place Robotnik will come looking for him.
Yeah, I guess we should bring him somewhere far away.
Tom and Maddie had spent the day planning so that they'd be ready now that the dark was settling outside. They were dressed in black clothes. Tom was carrying his gun and an assortment of wire cutters and a hammer. Maddie wore a backpack with only the essential things they'd need for after they hopefully rescue Sonic and went into hiding for a time being. Tom had called Wade and briefly explained their plan before asking him to look after Ozzy for the time being. Everything was in order, and they were ready to go. The strategy was simple. Go in, find Sonic, take him, and leave. Maddie volunteered to watch the horrible video again in order to visualize the lab where Sonic was hopefully still located. She threw the ring, and the plan went into motion. Sonic had no idea how much time had passed since he had been captured. Time had lost its meaning in his mind. All he knew was that he sometimes was in his cage, which was too low for him to stand up fully, and sometimes strapped to an operating table right next to it. Even pain had lost some meaning by now. It was always there, either psychologically or emotional. He'd been shocked, burned, plucked, poked, and stung. Yet the pain of knowing that there was no escape hurt at least just as much. The pain of not knowing if his family and his town were safe, it haunted him, both when he was awake and asleep. He rarely saw Robotnik himself. Usually his drones did all the work for him, taking Sonic from his cage and strapping him to the table. In order to keep Sonic from using his speed, the drones would begin by injecting him with sedatives that, much like the tranquilizer that Tom had accidentally hit him with, made his body more or less unresponsive. He had no choice but to sit still as the drone stuck the needle through the bars of the cage to inject the drugs. If he resisted, he'd be given a shock from his shock collar, so strong that left him unconscious, and then they'd still be sedating him anyway. Put short, Sonic's life was nothing short of a living nightmare, which was every day. He'd be brought to the table and tied down. Sometimes his ability to withstand electricity was tested, and sometimes the drones would pluck several handfuls of his quills and fur to draw blood samples. While resting in his cage between experiments, he'd flinch at every little sound, scared that the drones were coming back for a new round, including when the drones brought him food and water. If you could refer the greatest mush he received as food, Sonic had eaten garbage that tasted better. He had refused to eat several times, but that only earned him a strong electric shock from the collar that wouldn't stop before he began eating. One time he didn't give in. Although the collar kept shocking him, he simply refused to eat. It had led to one of the worst experiences of his imprisonment and life. The drones came back and sedated him. Like usual, he was tied to the operating table. He could just lay there, carefully awake, get helpless and paralyzed, as a tube was pushed down his throat, and he was force-fed the disgusting mush. He cried and fought as much as the drugs allowed him to, feeling like he was choking on the tube, but it didn't stop before all the food had been forced into him. He would have thrown it all up again deliberately if it wasn't because he knew that Robotnik would just put him through the same nightmare once more if he refused him again. At night, Sonic slept on a thin blanket in one corner of his cage. Usually, he was able to sleep throughout what he expected to be the night. There was no windows in the room. At least he'd wake up after what felt like a full night's rest. Not that he'd succeeded in that very often, but sometimes he was woken up several times to either get some sort of injection or have his vitals measured. Nightmares seemed to be the only kinds of dreams that his sleep was bringing to him in this place. Often, he would wake up from a bad nightmare drenched in sweat and panting from the fear. The dreams just felt so much more real in this place since they hardly were any different from his waking moments. Hope was a frail thing, and in this living nightmare, there was none to be found. He was all alone. His friends were most likely dead, and he was never going to see the sun again.